Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Agile meetup in Brisbane. It's great to have you with us. Thank you for joining us on this wonderful late winter evening. And I don't know about you guys, but you can probably tell I'm a bit chilly, even though it is Brisbane. We appreciate you being here. And tonight I'm very happy to introduce Michael. Michael and I have known each other for years. We've worked together for a couple of times. We both worked together at SoftEd. So we've got a bit of experience working with each other, but I'm just going to read a bit of a blurb about Michael. So although I did Google him and came up with many, many traits that Michael has, the honest and true ones are the one that Michael is an Agile coach, and he is also a trainer and a consultant working with SoftEd. He leans in deeply with many organizations to help solve complex problems. One of the things that Michael is really, really good at is working with organizations to help them to deliver value faster for customers by creating the right conditions for delivery. Also helping people become aware of what are the right problems to solve and how do they maximize their ability to make faster decision making. Michael works very closely with senior leaders of teams and team members to not only help share the wonderment that is agility, but also to help people understand the cultural shifts associated with agility and helping embed agility into teams' ways of working. So today, Michael is going to talk to us about retrospectives. So I might hand over to you, Michael.
Oh, wow. What a brilliant introduction, Sharon. Now my inner introvert has gone running for the hills and it is gone. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work as intended, but we will find out. So I'm going to share my screen and then we are supposed to go from there. Just bear with me.
So while Michael's doing that, if you have any questions during the session, feel free to chat them and I'll interrupt Michael. But I'm also sure that Michael would not be worried if you actually interrupted him as well. So I can see your screen.
Blank screen, no slides.
Lots of purple.
Lots of purple.
Blank screen, no slides.
Excellent. All right, let's try that. How are we going there?
Perfect.
Perfect. All right. So rethinking retrospectives beyond the 3 columns. So this was originally a talk me and a colleague, Craig Smith, those who hang out in the Agile meetups will know Craig. Unfortunately, he's not here to hang out with us today. So this will be just simply me going through this. So it was a talk that we did at Agile Online Summit last year or something like that. The years are getting blurred now, being remote and COVID and all that sort of stuff. So let's talk about retrospectives and beyond retrospectives. So look, what if you could wave your magic wand and make your sprints go smoother, faster, and better for the future? Look, retros are not magic, but it's probably your next best thing, right? It's really at the heart of every team. Teams are learning, they're improving, and we help them get better as coaches, as Scrum Masters. That's what we all do, right? We try to help teams improve. And for all us Agilists in this room, we all know what that means, right? But let's look back a little bit to see where it sort of all began. So what did we agree to? So look, we looked to the manifesto, the Agile Manifesto for software development for inspiration, right? Not only did they tell us to value individuals and interactions, we have a whole principle on retrospectives, really. I mean, look, in the principles of retrospectives, they talk about at regular intervals where we, the team reflects on how to become more effective, right? Then it tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly, right? No, it did tell us to reflect, but there's nothing in the rule book that says we need to do retrospectives, right? But rather that we need to continuously improve on a regular basis. And just because the 101 class and the Scrum guide and the Scrum classes said you have to do retrospectives, and your 101 classes tell that you have to do retrospectives with 3 columns, you can absolutely mix them up, right? So let's get that out of our heads. There are many books online, books and many resources online that can show you how to do things differently, different ways you can tackle retrospectives as well. So let's first of all, let's look at making retrospectives smaller as well. So one of the challenges that we do get hung up on is really trying to solve world peace problems with some teams. Look, the whole idea of Agile is about breaking things down, smaller, large, complex things, and we try to simplify them and make them into achievable chunks. We're not trying to solve world peace problems. What's something? It's something that you can think about that you can solve within, a small period of time, a time box in a week or a couple of weeks. So by the time you get to the next improvement point, another retrospective, that stuff is actually going to get done, right? So many teams try to brainstorm lots of things and try and get hung up on some of these bigger, chunky world peace problems, but some of the things are completely out of our control, and we should try to make things smaller and try to make things focus on things that actually matter and things that we can actually achieve. So focus on what really matters, the stuff that's outside of the team's control. That is something that we should not focus in on too much, because there's not much that we can do. We can complain about it, we can whinge about it, but can we actually really solve it? But there's stuff that the team actually has influence in. They can influence the system. They can influence people. They can influence how the process works. They can influence all those different things. But if we sit around and whinge about all the stuff that's out of the team's control, sometimes your retrospectives are not that effective and it becomes a bit of a whinge fest. Now, where you're going to get the real benefits of is focusing on stuff the team has control of or the team has influence on, so we can actually try to change the system around it and try to improve the things. But where you want to spend most of your time is on stuff that within our control, rather than stuff that's completely out of our control, like organizational problems, senior executives that are many layers up. Oh my God, it's all broken. The change and release process handled by another department. Yes, we can keep pushing, we can influence, but look, it's completely out of our control. But do we sit there and just keep complaining about it? So let's get down to the real problem. There's a real difference between pain, the cause of pain, all right, the point of pain versus root cause, right? So and you look at this picture here, you'll see that there's a problem, and the problem is, look, what's the problem? Did the person fall off the bike? What's the problem that this little Lego figurine has? The problem is pain. Person is feeling pain. That's the problem, and the point of cause is the bike, right? So when we look at problems, we need to try to identify where identify where the real problem is. And this comes off some brainstorming, comes off a little bit of thinking, and trying to decompose some of the bigger things that we perceive as a problem and we think as a problem, but we really need to break down the problem. So when we start to break down the problem, we can actually get down to the root cause of the problem. So you have the initial problem perception. So with large, complex problems and our perception of a problem, right? What we think is a problem. But to get down to the real problem, you need to clarify the problem, right? To get down to the real problem, right? You got to locate the point of cause. What happened? Where did it happen? Who was involved? When did it happen? So the point cause analysis, right? Which is what's happened, was an API involved, was a code software being run, those sorts of things. If we are able to identify it, then we break down and prioritize. And from there, once we break down and prioritize, once we've clarified the problem, we break down and prioritize, then we can start to work on the root cause, right? So this is where you can, once you've narrowed down your problem, this is where your root cause really helps, because sometimes once you haven't narrowed down the problem, what the problem actually is, might actually not be the real problem. So you go through a root cause analysis, which is, your 5 whys, and I'm sure most people are familiar with the 5 whys, is to figure out what that kind of looks like. And then we're putting countermeasures to stop that from happening again, right? And we evaluate it. See, was the countermeasures actually helpful? Did it actually solve those problems, right? And then we look at ways to standardize it. So we standardize it, so if a problem like that occurs, or we've stopped it because we've put countermeasures in part of the process, then that doesn't happen again. So we standardize the practices and the things as countermeasures so it doesn't happen again, right? But what we need to do is get to the real problem and break down the problem to understand what it actually is. So you can look at across your CI/CD processes, you can look at your testing processes, those sorts of things, identify those things. So lean people. Look, lean people love everything in Toyota, right? Except Kaizen, because continuous Kaizen is actually hard. And this is what makes lean very hard. So this is a quote from Fujio Cho, and he's an executive at Toyota. Look, Fujio Cho, Kaizen must be practiced every day in a consistent manner, not in spurts, right? If I'm asked to cite only one thing that makes Toyota different from other firms, is everybody understands there will be no end to Kaizen efforts, right? Kaizen is hard, but what makes it hard is the continuous nature of all the time. It doesn't stop, right? That's what makes Kaizen hard, continuously improving all the time. It's easy to copy, hard to do. Small and regular. So who said you needed to do a retrospective every 2 weeks? What if you did it every Friday to coincide the end of the week? You celebrate or wind down. What if you did a small one first thing in the morning to solve everyday smaller problems? And what if we did it after stand-up, solving those problems right after stand-up, rotate it around, try different things, right? So that gets us away from, this gets us from brainstorming at the very end, but solving problems there and then, because it's top of the mind, right? It's the first thing we think about. Like, problem occurs, okay, guys, team, let's get together and figure out how we might solve it. And we prevent it from happening, put countermeasures in, put different methods in to solve those things. And then maybe you want to do larger ones every quarter for a longer reflection, like a period of time for larger things across many teams. So you may want to have different scaled up retrospectives. So I'm going to tell you a story about a team that I had the wonderful pleasure of coaching. Now, this was an interesting team. Now, their work wasn't in software development, but the team, what they did was they applied a lot of. So this is interesting, because that team was naturally an agile team. I would have never thought about them being an agile team. They were a video production unit. Now, a video production unit, they typically go and film and record and do events and things like that. And after the event, they would debrief. Like if you were in the military, you do a mission, you come and you do debriefs and things like that. But their missions were so small. They would do many missions to film and record something and then work out what actually went well and what didn't go so well, and what can we do to improve the process, and what are the learnings that we can embed into our practices to improve things so they're not so we get away from making the same mistakes. Now, when I noticed this, I'm like, man, this team is an agile team. They're not doing software development. They're doing video production. They're doing very different work, but the way that they work is very agile. Now, I saw how much they improved, and they did understand the concept of retrospectives and sort of embedding into their ways of working very frequently, but the speed of improvement was massive. Every time I would work with them and observe how they work, processes change all the time. And they've come up with different rules for if you was on-site, off-site, traveling, different rules for different things. So I took that sort of concept and applied it to software development teams. And it was incredible. Like the pace of change and the pace of improvement was incredible. We had people who went overseas and came back after a month and go, oh my God, it's like a new team. All their processes are completely changed. It's like I've walked into a new team. I've joined a new organization. The process has changed that much that I have to relearn some of the process, but change for the better. Some of the pain points that they've identified earlier on has improved. So that's the story, which I had the wonderful pleasure of coaching this team. It was amazing because the speed of improvement is a lot faster, and there's collective sense making there and then when problem occurs and right after. So it's really fresh. It's not 1 week. It's not 2 weeks. It's not 3 weeks. It's not a month. It's there and then, right? And there's a real focus on teamwork because we all work as a team and how we're going to resolve issues together. But what I want to jump into is expanding retrospectives. So let's look at expanding retrospectives. So this is a different approach, right? I mean, there's lots of different agile frameworks out there that handles retrospective very differently, right? So I encourage you all to experiment and look at different ways to do retrospectives. So improve and scale your own retrospectives, right? There's different types of retrospectives, like release retrospectives. So after every release, you might want to do a retrospective. So Les talks about this overall retrospectives with product owners, scrum masters, team representative, managers at the beginning or at the end of every iteration. Now, Scrum of Scrums, the scaled retrospective, so you can do that as well with which is every sprint. Scrum of Scrums, so Scrum of Scrums holds a scaled version of a sprint retrospective. Other frameworks like Nexus has a sprint retrospective. It's kind of bottom up. It uses bottom up intelligence and focuses on the issues that sort of affects the whole Nexus as a whole. So different frameworks handle retrospectives differently, but I encourage you to expand and look at different and get inspired by different retrospectives from different frameworks. Now, when we talk about retrospectives, look, I'd like to sort of reclaim retrospectives a little bit. And look, and we've got a role to play here when we need to guide retrospectives as agile coaches, as scrum masters. We do have a thing that we need to do to help the teams improve, right? So we want to get away from meaningless retrospectives. Like we have meaningless improvements, and I'm sure that I've got some heads nodding there. That hey, look, we want to get away from meaningless retrospectives, or when you have patterns where you see there's very little participation in the retrospectives, focusing on too much stuff that's out of the team's control, or things that the team can influence. And sometimes we're too busy to do retrospectives. The team kind of skips it, right? So look, instead of having meaningless improvements, like hey, let's write better code. What does that mean? Or let's have more fun. Yeah, let's have more fun. Or let's go out, have lunch once a week. Or it's just simply a complaint session. That's a meaningless, it has meaningless improvements, right? So when you fall into that sort of pattern, let's start to unpack it with some questions, right? Look, let's say, hey, look, let's have more fun for a retrospective item. So let's dive into that a little bit, right? So let's put on our coaching hat. Is someone killing the fun? Well, let's dive into that. What's preventing the team from having fun? Okay, excellent. So this is where we start to uncover what we mean about some of these vague items, right? And like things like, hey, we should go out for lunch once a week. Is everyone getting along? Maybe, maybe not, right? So let's try to uncover some of that value hidden in those words. What are we trying to solve by going out to lunch together? Is it we not collaborating well? Do we not know each other well enough? Oh, how about write better code? Yes, big and vague. Are we writing better code? What's our definition of quality, right? So now this is where we start to narrow in on some of the challenges, right? So we get away from that meaningless retrospective. So when I talked about retrospectives that having people have little participation in the retrospective, so you need to consider a few things. Is it an open environment where it's completely safe, right? So there's things that we can do as coaches and scrum masters is to set the scene. Well, prime directives of retrospectives, norm curves, prime directives to set the scene, right? And that's something that we can do to help set the scene and set the tone for the retrospectives. But it also could be a sign that that we're bringing up the same stuff over and over again, and things are not improving. So we're not participating because, hey, I said this in the last retrospectives, the last 3 retrospectives, and it's the same stuff that's not getting addressed. So if things like that occur, it can prevent us from participating because it feels like there's no improvement, right? So we want to also get away from that. And I talked about the whole whinge fest and focusing on stuff that's within our sphere of influence. Look, the last thing I would say here is when teams want to skip retrospectives, don't. Look, the team should never be too busy to improve. If you've typically used an hour for a retrospective, you can try to cut it down to 30 minutes. Look, even a 15-minute retrospective or microspective, smaller retrospectives, tiny retrospectives, right? We can do something like that as well. So I encourage you to experiment with retrospectives. So inspect and adapt. Now safe. Oh, you safe lovers out there, this one's for you. Inspect and adapt. It comes in 3 parts. So after the program increment, there's a system demo, which is like we demonstrate the work that we've done, the working software, integrated working software that we've created across multiple teams, because we've all scaled up and everyone talks about scaling and safe and all the stuff. A system demo, right? We do that, then we do a qualitative and quantitative measurement. Then we have the retro, right? Which is the inspect and adapt, or inspect on how things were going, and then we try to adapt by doing the retrospective. So this is where teams get into the problem solving mode, right? So teams across the train will work together across teams to figure out things that they want to solve, right? So with the root cause, or the 5 whys of root cause, or we want, or using the Ishikawa diagram to do fishbone analysis to find out where do we need to focus in on. Now, PI planning retrospectives is really the last part of that is really to close off the end of the program increment, right? That 3 month is to close everything off and try to make improvements for the next program increment, so we don't fall into the same traps again. And this goes across teams. So we're not just focusing on our team, but across multiple teams where things interact with each other, where teams need to integrate with each other. And we're trying to solve those issues, including the challenges around releases, the challenges about coding standards across the whole train, things that management may need to get involved in as well, just so we have a smoother runway as we move into the next quarter. So let's look at expanding a little bit, right? So look upwards and outwards. So look, part of retrospectives is solving issues within the teams, but sometimes we just can't do things in isolation. So often the same problems that we have in our team are actually shared with other teams as well in the organization. So shared with our teams that we work with closely. So I encourage us to all to collaborate, to work together, to think about more than just our team, because there's more than just that. So expanding to extend teams to look at other teams, enabling teams, the business if we're not very close to the business, and look, even other organizations doing similar things. How did they solve some of these things? And look, conferences and meetups like this is a great spot where we can share stories and talk about how we solve some of these challenges, right? But we also need to look at expanding upwards to our executives, right? Escalate some of these issues and partnering up with them, the partnership with them to solve some of the more difficult challenges. So I want to ask, and you can use the chat here, what color is this Coke can? And just simply put it in the chat. I mean, if you're brave enough, you can you can unmute yourself as well.
I'll go for red.
Going for red?
White.
All right. So this is actually an optical illusion, right? Involving simultaneous color contrast. The colors here, so the color here, like in perception, with the context of the surrounding neighboring colors, influence its appearance, right? So the color that you see is cyan, right around. But what you actually, if you actually zoom in into the image, what you'll see is that the image is actually black. The Coke can is actually black. The lines of it is actually black. So I came across this image and I'm like, man, this image is just simply amazing in terms of when we need to think about problems, sometimes we need to zoom in and out a little bit, right? So we need to step back a little bit. Sometimes when we're so stuck into the weeds of it that we actually can't see the problem, right? We see it with one color, but when we step back away from it, we see it as a whole, the whole system itself. Now, this image is sort of stood out to me, and I'm like, oh wow, this is something that I'm going to be taking into the ways of how I think about things. Is you need to zoom in and out sometimes. Sometimes you need to zoom in, sometimes you need to zoom out. So take a different perspective because it will frame the problems differently. Now, problem solving. So let's think about how we rethink retrospectives, right? There's different ways. I've talked about lots of different ways for retrospectives, but essentially the retrospective is like pulling the undone cord, right? So those who are familiar with Toyota, when you pull the undone cord, when you need help, you need to stop the line because something's gone wrong, right? We need to pull the line, stop the work. We need to fix this. So we can use that sort of ways of doing things with pulling the undone cord, which is really fixing bugs. Let's say, for instance, fixing bugs, right? Bugs occur, but then if bugs occur, do we actually stop creating more bugs and actually fix the process that caused it in the first place? We pull the line, stop it, and yes, do it there and then, because look, if you spend time. If you don't spend the time to fix it now, what will happen is, look, it may come back and bite you back later, right? It will come back and haunt you. And yes, it takes time, and it takes a lot of time to build it in the ways of working, right? That sort of pull the undone cord to stop the line to solve some of these problems there and then, rather putting it back, putting it on the back seat, and we'll come back to it later. And those who've been will see that that's how technical debt sort of builds up over time as well, right? And it gets more and more complex. Forget about it, and those things sort of build up and get more complex. And if we're focusing on building new features all the time rather than solving some of the technical debt, that just makes things worse. So I encourage people to think about how we might do that. Now, team health metrics. Ooh, different ways to think about retrospectives. So, team health. Now, here's an example of a team health metrics, which is another way of doing things, which sort of expands right out of your typical retrospective, right? So this is a team health metrics, which we use to monitor the health of teams, right? So it goes into various attributes of teams that makes teams great, right? I want to think about some of these attributes that makes teams great. So this helps us keep a pulse on how things are going over a period of time. You may want to do this monthly, maybe every quarter, just get a stock take of where the teams are at, right? And I've used this and modified this for non-agile teams as well, because even if you have non-agile teams, they still work together as teams. But you may modify the language to see how they're actually operating as well, and that they can sort of build that sort of continuous improvement to improve their ways of working and team together. So something like this is measured typically with attributes, right? You measure with attributes, and the team would be giving their input on how things are actually going in terms of different aspects, whether it's process, whether it's communication, whether it's the metrics the team is using, how they're managing dependencies. And it's a good way to stock take everything, right? And here's a collective metric graph across the teams for a program that I was coaching for these teams. And typically when we do retrospectives, typically team health often gets missed in a retrospective because we're focusing on within the sprint, generally about the processes and things like that, but we actually don't measure things that, and these are some of the things we actually don't talk about during the retrospective. So, and we don't measure the attributes. So, and if you can see where I'm going with this, there's different ways that we draw out some of those things as well. So, and typically these things take time to resolve. They're not really easy things to resolve, and sometimes it takes multiple sprints, and sometimes it might even take months to resolve. So it's a good stock take of where things are at, right? So you'll see here, look, this is it in practice across multiple teams, and it's just a good indicator of where things are at, right? It shows an overall picture of the team as a collective rather than just individual teams. So there's some common things in some areas that can be tackled. So now, I just want to focus everyone in on rethinking and repurposing retrospectives. Just encourage you to think about things differently. You know, what the purpose of a retrospective is, and what the intent of a retrospective is. So you can focus and repurpose your retrospectives to focus on different elements, right? Whether it's reflecting on how did you go for your sprint objectives? Did you meet them? Did you meet your goals? Have you achieved your product goals? Did you meet your PI objectives? And if you're doing OKRs, are you tracking against your OKRs? Look, we always need to reflect on our journey and make improvements, right? So we can continuously deliver more value to our customer and people, right? Because those small improvements will help us move forward, right? So just to wrap up, I suppose it's look, make retrospective smaller, do them more regular, more often. Have a mission. Focus on things that actually matter, not the world peace problems that is out of your control. And I'd encourage people to think about expanding retrospectives so you can do it more wisely in a way that sort of adds value. So so take learnings from other frameworks. I encourage you to take learnings from other frameworks and essentially inspect and adapt, right? And if you really want to spice things up, swap Scrum Masters around, right? You can use another facilitator and they will provide an alternative perspective on things as well, just to spice things up. So that's it from me.
Thanks, Michael. Well, you did it. You covered a bunch of ground, lots of really good insights. Does anyone have any questions for Michael about what he's covered?
You may have seen, Michael, on the chat that people got particularly interested in the team health chart.
Yep. Yeah, I can see that. Plus, I'd also like to get a copy of the team health chart. Yep, look, more than happy to share that around, and hopefully you will find it useful as well, and it can help draw out some interesting things as well that that might move your teams along on their Agile journey as well.
Brilliant, thank you. We might get you to send it to John, and we'll get John to post it on the meetup.
Yeah, sure.
As he does that, and we'll post the talk on the meetup YouTube site as well. Any other questions for Michael?
Hi, Michael, it's Justin again. It's in the chat, but what do you do to measure and assess the psychological safety within the team? And what tactics do you deploy to ensure you have safety before you start the retro?
So this is good. Great question. So, so before I took these sort of these team health metrics away from doing that, because in the past I used to do it in the room, with everyone there, and it would be a thumbs up for things are going great. Sideways, not so great. We'll probably need some improvement. Thumbs down was it's terrible. We need to talk about it. And what I actually found was some of those conversations used to be dominated by the more vocal ones and the ones that opinionated about things. But when we moved into a remote way of working, and there was no way to do it in a way which wasn't, I need to find a way that was more effective. So I turned the team health metrics into an online form, which was anonymous. Which was completely anonymous. I made sure that the team understood that it was anonymous. I could not see who actually put things, what they put in, who did it. All I had was basically a timestamp of when people did it. We were able to draw out on a lot of those things. It's actually, are we psychologically safe in this team? Are we able to raise things up without being reprimanded or being judged, those sorts of things, and you were able to provide comments. And what we did was we used a lot of those things to sort of to group those things together and get an overall score, which we would play back to the team. So it was completely transparent that, hey, look, we're hearing what you're saying, and if things aren't working well, what are we going to do to resolve those things? So we never picked on people and made it uncomfortable. So that's how I've handled it in the past.
Anyone have any other thoughts around that?
I see someone's also using the Spotify team health check as well with their teams. Yeah, there's lots of different team health checks out there. I think Atlassian uses a different one, and yes, Spotify uses a different one. This is one that I sort of adopted from some experimentation and also adopting. It's gone through a few iterations from feedback as well. So hopefully, yeah, you will find it useful.
Thanks, Michael. Any other questions or comments for Michael?
Separate question. So in the clarify the issues and stuff, it looked like you're aiming for like a single root cause. Just wondering what happens when you run into wicked problems.
Oh, when you run into wicked problems, look, some things that if it's out of our control, maybe look, it might even be a 10% solution that we brainstorm on. What does a 10% solution look like? Because when we have wicked problems, typically those things take a lot of thought, and you need also more collective people, actually probably outside of your control, and you need contribution from and support from executives as well. So what would a 10% solution look like? So that might get the ball moving, right? Your 10% solution might be, look, it's not the real solution, but we need to get executives on board. Okay, so how are we going to get executives on board? Well, there's different ways of doing that. So what's something that's going to resonate with executives? So we can think about, providing recommendations or metrics. Metrics speak, numbers speak, dollar figures speak. To executives. Typically, when you talk about executives, they don't care how many sprints you take. They don't care about your retrospectives or your sprint planning or how fantastic your stand-ups is. Money talks, metrics talk, value talks. So being able to pull on some of those things, they're your levers. And if you're able to pull on those levers, that's what will get the execs talking. Right, and that's where the wicked problems are, which is sort of outside of our realm, where we need some partnerships. I hope that helps.
Oh, thanks.
I had a question just about the frequency of the retros or skipping retrospectives, because in our team we do 2-week sprints, and our team recently decided to skip the retro just once per sprint, and let's do it every second sprint, like so it's monthly instead of fortnightly. So what do you think of actually going the other way instead of doing it more frequently, like less frequently? Is that sort of an anti-pattern, or
look,
you shouldn't really do?
So there's a couple of thoughts around this. So when teams find that, hey, look, our retrospectives is we need to move our retrospectives, so we're doing it less frequently. When we do things less frequently, we typically forget a lot of the stuff that happened early on in the sprint, and stuff that happened mid-sprint, and the pains we feel towards and closer to the retrospectives, and we forget all this sort of stuff. Is the challenge you will have with doing retrospectives less frequently. What I would encourage you to look at is what's stopping the team from having more regular retrospectives? Is it could it be is it boring? Is it the same patterns over and over again? Are we doing the 3 columns all the time? Or is our retrospectives getting meaningless, that we're not getting to action, therefore we, it's the same stuff that's coming up in this retrospective and this retrospective. So why don't we just do it less often? And that's some of the things I would be trying to look at, and trying to increase the frequency of the retrospectives. Maybe you don't even do retrospectives and you do microspectives instead. As long as the team is moving in the right direction, that's something that you may want to consider is, hey, we might do these bigger chunky retrospectives, and you call it your monthly retrospective, and then you might do micro retrospectives throughout the sprints. So you're building that feedback cycle into the work process more often. So that's something that you may want to talk to the team about is, okay, maybe you do little 15-minute retrospectives at the end of every week or something like that. I mean, it's no longer than a stand-up. What does that look like? So that's something to consider.
Yeah, because in our particular case, I guess our team, the reason they decided that it was, we felt like we're working generally fairly well together, and because it seemed too frequent, there wasn't enough different topics and things coming up. So it seemed like spacing it out, it allowed enough more time, I guess, to do the retrospective actions and then think of more things to bring to the retrospective. So that's kind of, I guess, where the thoughts came on for our team. So I'm not sure if that's a strong enough reason to consider spacing it out more, or if maybe that just works better for our particular team or not.
So
it might be worthwhile doing a retrospective on how you do retrospectives. Retrospectives serve multiple functions, and some of them are as simple as, okay, we had stuff today, let's identify what the problem is so that we can go through it in more depth later on. Sometimes it's, hey, we did great today, let's get it over with. And sometimes we got a disaster on our hands and we really need to do a retrospective so it doesn't happen again. It's worthwhile thinking about what you're doing the retrospective for and getting the team to think about what's the point of doing it in the first place. If it's just because we've got the same things coming up over and over again, well, we're probably doing it wrong.
Retro your retro.
Yeah,
and retro that retro.
Do a meta retro, except not Facebook.
Okay, thanks.
And you can retro your stand-ups, you can retro your sprint planning as well. So there's the different techniques. You can, do the fist of 5. How well did this go? How well was our retrospective? Did we get what we wanted, or how great was our stand-up? Felt like a status report.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Arthur.
No worries.
All right. Is there any other questions in the chat, or anyone brave enough to ask any other questions? Any thoughts, comments?
One of the things that came up for me, Michael, was I can remember years ago. Now, this was an academic, and you know how academics love qualifying everything. He said the one thing that always improves teams' performance, he referred to it as reflection, but it's basically what you're talking about with retrospectives. Yeah. Without that, you will not get the teams continuing to perform, or to continuing to improve rather, because they haven't had a chance to reflect on what they've done and where the opportunities for improvement are. And on the other hand, if you're not doing it well, you're not really reflecting. You're not really doing the retrospective. And I really like the way you were changing this up to go, hey, let's not lock ourselves into his retrospective as decreed by God on Mount Sinai. Yeah. We have different ways in which we can do this that will work at different times. And sometimes it's going to look very brief and bullet. And sometimes it's going to be, we need a day or a week to do this one properly.
Surely, Arthur, you're not suggesting being flexible and adaptive in the approach that you take to doing anything. Oh my goodness,
no.
Arthur.
God, I do love a bit of irony occasionally. Thank you.
It's a great point, though. Sorry, I did cut you off. I apologize.
No. That was perfectly timed. But as much as anything, that was a long-winded way of saying, Michael, thank you. Cool.
Welcome.
One other,
I'd like to
one
say,
other thought. Oh,
Yep.
Go on.
Red, with you.
Let's
Yes,
go with
Sammy.
I'm going to
Sammy.
jump in. I'm going to jump in. I just want to say thank you very much. I think this was really great. You know, so much insight and depth in that. And it's really just a comment that I had that a team I had in the past wanted to do less retrospectives because they felt that not enough issues were coming out. And one thing I said to teams, well, how about we put things on the retro board as the sprint goes along, and then there'll be, maybe be more issues at the end, and then we can sort of sift through them. Ones aren't relevant anymore. But this really does show that, yeah, there could be a number of different reasons they didn't want that, and having micro retrospectives would have been much better idea. So yeah, it's a lot of insight.
Thanks, Sammy. David.
Yeah, just on you had a slide on like guide to something with 5 or 6 steps in it, and I would strongly urge you to put a chunk in between gather data and generate insights, and it's really about exploring the data, and because people tend to do that as part of their kind of generating insights, and all too often that gets kind of shortcut or kind of overlooked a bit. So if you lay it out, then what you got is all the other stuff's really good, but just explicitly call out, explore the data.
Thanks, David.
Okay, is there any other questions, comments, or thoughts?
All right.
All
I think that's a wrap. We're sticking our fork in it and call it done.
Yeah.
But we do also encourage lots of other people who may want to do lightning talks and things like that. It's a really good opportunity. So if you're feeling up for it and you've got a great topic you want to present, or you're feeling strong about something that you want to voice your opinion on, please contact the organisers for Agile Brisbane, and that would be John and Craig, and they'd love to have more speakers as well. So if you're keen to get into the speaking game and sharpen your speaking saw or your speaking mouth or whatever you want to use, analogy you want to use, here's your opportunity.
Absolutely, in a safe and receptive place.
Safe with a capital SAF and lowercase e?
No, as in a psychologically safe space.
Okay, I was just checking.
We're amongst friends here.
Indeed.
All right. Well, on behalf of the organising committee, I would like to thank you, Michael, for your event this evening. It was great, a really good insight, lots of great takeaways. Send us through the links and we'll make sure that we post them on the meetup page, or send everyone who's been here a link to where the links are going to be. John organises all that stuff. I have absolutely no idea how it happens. So please watch your inbox, and I'm sure something will arrive at some stage if you've registered for the meetup. If not, just reach out to John and say, Sharon said you'd send me this stuff. I think that'd be a great way to do it, and feel free to do it daily, at least hourly. Just, I'm only joking. I'll talk to John and see what we can come up with. Again, thank you very much for being here. If you do want to present something, please let us know. Always keen for more people to become actively involved in the community. But with that, I'm going to thank everyone for your time, and Michael especially, thank you for your energy. I will stop recording now, and we'll see you all next time.